In the early 1950s, the United States is in the midst of what left-wing historians will later call the Red Scare. Well, it was a Red Scare, but there were reasons for it. Just because you're paranoid doesn't mean the world isn't out to get you. A lot of people ask themselves, is the future really a choice between two very different tools that humans will use to move forward? Is it really a choice between the United Nations organization or the H-bomb? Are we in a situation where we finally have to make peace? Because if we don't, the world will be destroyed in atomic fire. Average Earth temperature being 15,000 Fahrenheit degrees at sea level. Well, there are real concerns about that. And the war in Korea could have spiraled out of control. And the crisis in Berlin could re-erupt at any time. And there is communist fighting in Indochina against the French and in half a dozen other places throughout Asia, like Indonesia. Will the world embrace peace and diplomacy like the United Nations would have it, turning swords into plowshares and learning war no more? Or will we go into atomic destruction? Stalin's death on March the 5th, 1953, gives the world a new chance. In his old age, Stalin was just as dangerous as he ever was. He authorized the Korean War. Without Stalin around, it was possible for the Soviets and the Chinese and the North Koreans to make peace. With him around, not so much. In the early 1950s, the Cold War begins to expand in its breadth, but reduce in its intensity. In Iran, they elect a socialist premier named Mohammad Mossadegh, who makes noises about nationalizing the oil industry in Iran, which is a big-time industry. Many people think he's a Soviet stooge. So the American CIA, with the help of the Shah of Iran, the hereditary monarch Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, overthrows Mossadegh with a series of crowd demonstrations orchestrated by the CIA. This is one of the more blatant cases of the American intelligence service overthrowing a government. Many Americans on the left say it was a sin because we overthrew an elected government to get rid of a pro-communist government. As a part of the Cold War, that sort of thing made sense, but from an idealistic standpoint, not so much. In 1956-57, the 20th Party of Congress of the Soviet Union, the Communist Party of the Soviet Union, CPSU, is convened. And by this point, the succession of who will take over after Stalin dies is now much more clear. Nikita Sergeyevich Khrushchev is going to be the new leader of the Soviet Union. And Khrushchev, in the 20th Party Congress, does something shocking. He criticizes Joe Stalin by name. He says that Stalin built a cult of personality, that Stalin distorted socialism and communism, and that Stalin did damage. Up until this point, within the communist world, Stalin was like the second coming of Christ. He was infallible, the generalissimo who won the war. He was a figure possessed of a cult of personality. And now the leader of the Soviet Union is criticizing him? Well, what Khrushchev wants to do is establish what's called goulash communism, which is to reduce Stalin's emphasis on heavy industry and military and increase the production of consumer goods to improve the lifestyle of many people in the communist world. But at the same time as trying to improve the economics of the communist world, Khrushchev wants to maintain an ironclad political control. He is not by any means a liberal, although his influence is liberalizing, if you get the idea. One fruit of that liberalization is that the people of Hungary revolt. They kick out their communist government in 1956, and they proclaim a Hungarian republic, and they ask for Western help. Within 2 weeks, the Soviets have completely crushed the Hungarian rebellion with tanks. It is a bloody repression, and Khrushchev makes clear it's going to be liberalization on his terms, no one else's. And within the communist system, showing that kind of strength earns you legitimacy. People will take you seriously when you demonstrate your willingness to kill people, a lot of them fast. At the same time, there's an event I'll talk about when we talk about the decolonization next week, the Suez Crisis of 1956 in Egypt, where the independent Egyptian government seizes the Suez Canal, and the British and French and Israelis try taking it back, and the Americans get involved, and not for the better. In 1957, the Soviets launched the world's first artificial moon, Sputnik. Sputnik is a basketball with a bunch of antennas sticking out, made of steel, and it emits a radio pulse, beep, 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 as it orbits the world. People would go out into their backyards and they would look up and they'd watch Sputnik go overhead, a little bright moving star, super fast crossing the horizon. We had assumed in the West that the Russians were a bunch of backwoods, barbarians, Mongols and such. But after World War II, it wasn't just the West that, with its Operation Paperclip, managed to sneak up all the German rocket scientists like Wernher von Braun. The Soviets did the same thing. We assumed that Germans in Russian hands gave them Sputnik, and it's true, they helped. But a Russian was actually responsible. His name was Sergei Korolyov. And Sergei Korolyov, at Star City in Kazakhstan, the Baikonur Cosmodrome, builds the world's first functioning intercontinental ballistic missile. Sputnik is launched into orbit, and it doesn't take a genius to know that if you can launch Sputnik into orbit, you can launch an atomic warhead anywhere in the world. If you can put an object into orbit, it actually takes less rocket energy to launch an object from one point on the Earth's surface to the other. And the Russians very quickly demonstrate a heavy lift capability to launch massively powerful hydrogen bombs. And this creates fear in the West of a missile gap. And it sparks the space program in the United States. The war between the United States and the Soviet Union is called a Cold War because we never go toe-to-toe full scale, thank God, because if we had, the world probably would have come to an end. But it is cold in that we fight through politics, through scientific competition, through spending in the developing world. We fight through proxy wars and through spies and wars of assassin, but we do not come directly to blows. It is a long twilight struggle because we have to fight without fighting. We have to accept things that MacArthur never could, like a defeat in North Korea, but victory in South Korea, and calling it victory because we held the line against the North taking over the South. Fighting not to win, but to have a stalemate. The rules of the game in the Cold War were you can win a little, you can lose a little, but you don't push the other side hard into a corner. Because if you do, it could be the end of all things. The fact that the Russians have rockets first scares the bejesus out of the Americans and the West. Then, we come back to Berlin. West Berlin is a running sore in the communist world. West Berlin is an island of freedom in the midst of slavery. Every day, West Berlin is swamped by Eastern Germans and Eastern Europeans leaving East Germany to go to the West for sanctuary. It's an embarrassment. If communism is so good, communism shouldn't be something people are trying to escape from, to go to evil capitalism. So on 13th August 1961, what is his name? East German Chancellor, little guy with the glasses. Anyway, the East Germans, with Russian approval, shut all the roads and the rails, and they immediately start stringing barbed wire across Berlin. And in the course of doing this, they begin building a wall. Anyone who tries to escape is dragged back by force. Anyone who is caught trying to cross the barricades is shot dead. The Berlin Wall is proof that the communists have failed in their promise to bring a better world. In fact, John F. Kennedy eventually goes to Berlin and very famously says, for those people who do not understand what the Cold War, the war between the free world and communism is about, let them come to Berlin. And in Berlin, you see that communists require guard dogs, barbed wire, and machine guns to keep their people prisoner. Because it's a slave society. And when freedom is just across the street, why not go? From 1961 until the end in 1989, November of, hundreds of people were killed trying to escape communism as they were trying to cross the Berlin Wall. In 1962, October of, we actually come very close to Armageddon. We'll talk about that next.